Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're very honored to be here with all of you from around the country and around the world to celebrate Power of Our Stories Won't Stop, Intergenerational Truth-Telling as Civic Democratic Practice. The book is edited by Helena Moon and Madeline Moon Chun. In addition to editor Helena Moon, other panelists tonight include Akemi Kuchiyama, Allegra Lawrence Hardy, Andrea Young, Anthony Downer II, Danielle Buhuro, Harvey Dong, and Sig Sarah Giordano. This book on the power of intergenerational truth-telling as civic democratic practice was written for high school students. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Teach for Freedom Collective and the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights. The Teach for Freedom Collective is a grassroots group seeking to support a mass movement of educators, students, and communities to develop liberatory educational spaces. The Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights empowers, advocates, educates, and organizes people of African descent affected by systemic racism in our community. They focus on issues of equity in education, housing, public art, and monuments, as well as the legal system. So I am so happy to have you all here. Helena has been an important part of our community for a long time and has written many books. And so it's really exciting to get to honor this book and this work, which has been put together with so many amazing people. So I want to encourage folks to feel free to ask questions at any time. Put them in the chat or in the Q&A box on the right-hand side, and we will incorporate them towards the end of the event, but we want to make space for all of the wonderful people who are going to be participating tonight. You'll see, because all of these folks have busy lives of activism and work, they will be popping in, and we're just going to go with the flow, so we hope that you'll enjoy that aspect of it. But first, I'm going to kick it over to Helena Moon to offer a land acknowledgement and also another kind of grounding for us. So welcome, Helena. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much, E.R. I want to thank Karis Books E.R. Anderson, Sarah Look, and Artricia Rollins for hosting this book celebration event for us. In terms of land acknowledgement, I am participating from my home in DeKalb County in Georgia, which sits on the land of the Muskogee Creek people. We are honored to have some of the contributors to the book project with us tonight. They are committed activists, brilliant intellectuals, and thoughtful, generous people who are also super busy. So Anthony Downer and I are deeply grateful for their commitment to this project. They are lawyers, educators, pastors, counselors, students, and our publisher, Harvey Dong, who I'm not sure where he is right now, but hopefully he'll show up because will be joining us this evening from Berkeley, California. Regretfully, Douglas Daniels and Dr. Cecile Axelian had some last-minute matters to attend to and could not be a part of the conversation tonight. So I just wanted to acknowledge that they will be missed. I was also asked to speak about how this book project for high school students got started, and I did write about it in the intro, so I won't spend too much time here. A couple of years ago, when I taught a course to college students on modern Korean history, aspects of what they learned regarding US involvement in Korea were completely new to them and different from the perspectives they learned in high school. Several of the students commented in their papers and in their discussions that they could not understand why they don't learn truths until they get to college. They said they would be better citizens if they learned truths and could use their learnings to help vote, shape policies, have more effective conversations with one another, etc. Not only were truths of history regarding gender, race, militarism, imperialism, sexuality, etc., important for the students in my class, they saw the problems of the propaganda and myths undermining education as deeply scary. There is much more to how this book came together, but as most of this story is in the introduction, I want to state briefly that I didn't think students have to wait until college to learn truths of history. So this book was written for a high school audience. And the main questions we asked the contributors to address was, what I wish I had known in high school, now that I know what I know. We have amazing people who are renowned in their respective fields of law, academic Madeleine's education, who have sacrificed their precious family time tonight to speak and share their stories. One of the presenters, Harvey Dong, our publisher, is part of the overall history of how ethnic studies and Black studies came to exist. So while my daughter Madeline and I started the project, Anthony Downer, our educational consultant, helped shape this book project to be what it is. I am continually inspired by his work in the Georgia community as a public intellectual, activist, teacher, and coalition builder. He is building onto the work of the founders of ethnic studies and Black studies in lifting up the importance of coalition building across ethnicities and seeing the importance of addressing sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, economic well-being, environmental justice, religious biases, among other topics. Anthony had been an active as a student leader at the University of Chicago and founded a mentorship program to address the lack of non-white students in leadership roles at the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. On an NPR story, political consultant for Barack Obama, David Axelrod, stated that Anthony was the up-and-coming leader to pay attention to. They butted heads constantly. Anthony was not settling for the status quo. Please read the intro to learn more about how this book project got started. I now want to give Anthony a chance to speak about his role as educational coach, consultant, and his use of media pedagogical methods to turn this static book into an ongoing dialogical reflection with students, community groups, and educators. And after Anthony speaks, we will try to have the contributors present in the order in which their chapter appears in the volume, but a few of the contributors are not here, so we're going to go with the order in which the people are available. So, Anthony?
Thank you, Professor Moon, and thank you to Karis and the Decatur community for hosting tonight's conversation. This conversation and the book that it's based on is part of our resistance to classroom censorship and book bans, which we know has been an ongoing and repeating tool of white supremacy to control and exclude certain narratives from the curriculum, from what we learn. And tonight, and for so long, many of us have been defending the freedom to teach and learn. I thank you also to the Teach for Freedom collective, of which I co-chair, and the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights, of which I remember, for co-sponsoring tonight's conversation and doing the work in our brick and mortars and in our communities to defend the freedom to teach and to learn. I thank Professor Moon for the opportunity for this book. And I think about how this happened and how it unfolded in like my classroom and in activist spaces. For example, in the summer of 2021, a group of ragtag badass educators who taught primary, secondary, and tertiary education in Georgia stood up to fight against the oncoming onslaught of classroom censorship. We created what was called then the K-16 Teach Truth Coalition, which has now been rebranded as the Teach for Freedom Collective, to broaden our fight. We built defenses and we held each other together during the attack on higher ed, for instance, or the most recent rollback of diversity, equity, inclusion, and teacher preparation programs. And this book is going to be an important ongoing tool for how we keep the conversation going. So please plug in to just this first conversation or informal book tour that will keep going into next year and beyond, because this is our contribution to the ongoing legacy of Black organizing traditions. You can join us, for instance, on my podcast, That Way, Conversations on Education and Liberation, coming this semester. We'll talk to some of the contributors who couldn't be here tonight about what this means and connections, for instance, to Pan-Africanism and Black history. We're also going to be in a town near you. So if you would like to host us in our classroom, if you in a classroom, in a library or bookstore, please reach out to us. In fact, our call to action tonight is that you buy this book and donate it to a teacher who teaches high school, any subject, or that you host a book study for this book, or that you help us construct, for instance, a study guide so that is added to the curriculum and aligned with standards. But however you engage and support us, we thank you for being here tonight. And we're so excited to keep this conversation going and once again uphold my ancestors' legacy of resistance and education.
Thank you, Anthony. Next, we will hear from Dr. Sig Giordano.
Hi, everyone. It's really fantastic to be here. Thank you to Karis. Thank you, Helena and Anthony, who put a lot of work into this. I was so excited when Helena invited me. I'm Sig and also go by Sarah Giordano, and I teach at Kennesaw State University. I'm going to read from my chapter, which, to give you kind of an idea, this is probably the most personal thing I've published before. So I enjoyed the prompt, but I'm also supposed to try to tease you into buying the books. So maybe by saying there's some personal tidbits, you might be interested in that. So especially because the title of my chapter is called "Are Queers Dangerous? What I Wish I Had Known About the Intersection of Race, Gender, Class, and Sexuality in High School." When I was 20 years old, I took a women's studies course. The night after we read Adrienne Rich's Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence, I kissed a woman for the first time. In this chapter, I write about sexuality from a feminist science studies perspective. I interweave my personal story of understanding sexuality with critical histories of sexuality through the work of feminist, Black, decolonial, and queer studies scholars. But how can reading an article change one's sexuality, you might ask? I write this chapter in the midst of right-wing attacks on critical and social justice teaching in K-12 classrooms. While some might argue that the conservative premise that teaching about queer sexualities are safe because they cannot, quote unquote, make someone gay, I take a different approach here. What I think conservatives have correct is that the kind of knowledge we pass on to our children and each other matters a lot for who we are and who we can become. What I mean is this: if we start to learn about systems of race, gender, nation, sexuality, ability, etc. as socially and historically constructed, we may begin to ask more questions about why and how these categories gained importance and remain so important in our society. We may ask why these categories are so highly regulated. Why are we told we are naturally one or the other? Why do we have to choose a binary gender? Why are we assigned a binary sex at birth? We may further interrogate how the regulation of sex gender leads to the production of heterosexuality and what that regulation has to do with other systems of power. After asking all these why and how questions about these categories of difference, we may just start imagining and dreaming together about what else can be possible. Well, as a 19 or 20-year-old, I may have been preoccupied by challenging the physical connection that I now felt had been denied to me. The point of the article is more significant than suggesting that women having sex with other women will bring liberation. I'm not saying you shouldn't try it, though. The lesbian continuum she describes includes relationships between women from mother-daughter to friendships, to shared political activism, to sexual and/or romantic. This definition has power to thus challenge the structures that keep women in a subservient role to men by working together, enjoying time alone, and together to find new ways to get our needs and desires met. With this new approach to sexuality, I was able to both enjoy my body and others in new ways, other people's bodies in new ways, and to recognize and study heterosexuality as, quote unquote, a political institution. So one of the questions I ask is, how do we change our orientation to sexuality to study it as a political institution instead of a biological fact? Queer politics offered me the potential to understand and challenge the links between capitalism and sexuality in a way that felt powerful and fun. From dropping a banner over a highway overpass that read, "Make queer love, not straight war," to queer burlesque and drag performances as fundraisers for political prisoners that were being charged with terrorism, to restructuring my relationships to revalue feminist friendships. This orientation to queer identity is something sometimes hard to explain. A long-term lover had this problem trying to explain what being queer meant to a therapist. Finally, she used an example from one of our dates, saying, "Changing plans to have sex to go to protest Trump's Muslim ban instead is my sexuality." Without having time to provide a long history lesson on biology, colonization, and the production of difference, this definition, by way of example, may just open up enough questions to get to the coalitional possibilities and radical potential of queerness. With the legislative attacks on educators teaching or discussing gay topics and gender policing of bathrooms and sports team membership, it seems that the right wing may be the ones most likely to believe that challenging normativity might be dangerous. I hope their fears are correct. I hope this essay helps to lead more queer youth to live fully and see how all our struggles and liberation are connected. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giordano. That was wonderful. Next, we will hear from Kemi Kochiyama. Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony Downer, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Thank you, Sig in the house. Thank you for setting the stage and for the energy. Y'all go get this book. That's all I can say. I dedicate my chapter to my mom, Jasmine, my dad, Anthony Sr., my brothers, Malcolm, Justin, and Dion, my grandmother, Carol Curtis, the over 500 students I taught directly at Peace Ridge High School and Gwinnett County Public Schools, and then at Frederick Douglass High School and Atlanta Public Schools, and now the over almost 6,000 students I get to support as equity coordinator in City Schools of Decatur in Georgia. Let's get to it. This is part 2, practicing and sharing stories of liberation. Chapter 5, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, the tradition of Black education as a practice of freedom. I sat staring at the page in front of me, feeling myself warming up and uncomfortable, emotions stirring in mind and soul. I was embarrassed and ashamed, not for myself, but for my white 4th grade teacher, lecturing at her classroom of predominantly unassuming scholars. As Ms. Crawford presented on the history of American slavery, my eyes wouldn't leave the image of my page, a group of enslaved Africans chained at the necks, wrists, and ankles. We hadn't discussed Black people until this day. Our history was reduced to this image and this historical event. She's not telling the whole story, I thought. Why isn't she telling the truth? She talked about the desperate need for labor, used the word slave, and stopped short of details about the violent system. As a teacher now, I wonder what it was like for Ms. Crawford to introduce most of her students, many of them descendants of enslaved Africans, to such a topic. What did she know? What didn't she know? How did she prepare? How did it make her feel? I now realize the full extent of my embarrassment and shame at 8 or 9 years old. The U.S. education system had failed Ms. Crawford. It had failed all of us. It excluded my people and their history from the curriculum, creating a chasm between teacher and students, leaving stranded a white educator charged with the education of Black and brown learners. Even then, I felt the tension between the textbooks and standards in the brick and mortar and the holistic learning my ancestors and family afforded me. When I thought, why isn't she telling the truth? I really meant, why is she telling the truth that I know? You see, my mom committed herself to an age-old Black proverb, each one teach one. She passed along to me what her family gave her, our history. Before hearing my teacher's version of slavery in the 4th grade, my mom introduced me to the institution years before. I was born to a young married couple in 1994. My mom was a junior at Spelman College, my dad a Navy veteran. She carried me to classes, and by 2 years old, she had disciplined me enough to read and write. Through books, obituaries, reunion programs, and photos, she showed my brothers and me our family history, interwoven into the Pan-African story, the history of our people across time and space. I learned what I should have learned in 4th grade and every grade, that my people were not just enslaved. Around 1883, 2 former slaves settled in what would become Fairview, Texas. They were David Crockett, my great-great-great-grandfather, who descended from Africans and Seminole Native people, and Charlie Westbrooks, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, a product of rape. New generations were born, with marriages sometimes resulting in 17 children. In the 1930s, my great-grandparents, J.B. Westbrooks and Vidalia Adams, married, and in 1939, their families joined a movement of Blacks fleeing the terror and oppression of the South. They landed in Oakland, California. JB became a longshoreman and made sure he left a mark on the world, intertwining his family in U.S. history. The Westbrooks in Oakland championed equal rights and justice by refusing to unload ships that came from South Africa to protest apartheid. They pushed the city to hire more blacks on the waterfront. My great uncle Aaron founded and sold what became skycapping at airports. JB's daughter Connie became the first female truck driver of any race in Oakland, and his daughter Carol, my grandmother, organized with the Black Panthers and later served as chapter president and national recording secretary of the National Council of Negro Women. My ancestors' activism, education, entrepreneurship, and resilience made me. I discovered this outside the classroom. An authentically Black-centric classroom has criticality, identity development, intellectualism, and joy. These are the pillars and learning environments I cultivate today based on the scholarship of Drs. Adam Green, Zaretta Hammond, Bettina Love, Goldie Muhammad, and others. Most of the classrooms I've entered have lacked these essential ingredients to nurturing a Black boy's brilliance. As I explore complex personal inquiries, who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? I was largely left to my own academic and scholarly devices. As my imagination flowed and brain developed, I navigated a disconcerting dilemma. As I demonstrated superior performance in gifted classes and on standardized assessment, I had to code switch in an environment that conflicted and rejected my culture and identity. I did, however, have advocates in this classroom who resisted the Eurocentric status quo. You got to buy the book to hear more. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And next we will hear from Kemi Kochiyama.
So hi, everyone. I guess I want to start by just saying that I'm a scholar activist. That's how I would define myself. And I'm also a co-director of the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Project. And I think that I'm doing this work and I'm here tonight and was involved with this project because of my grandma Yuri, who was a Harlem-based activist who dedicated her life, her whole entire life to civil and human rights, and who very tediously documented every political, cultural, or social event she ever attended, all the people she met and worked with, and all the movements she was involved in for more than 70 years. In so doing, I think she created an archive for BIPOC solidarity and movement building in the latter half of the 20th century in New York City. And I've been very involved with that archive for the last 20 years. In my chapter, I share part of this story because I think that my grandmother's life and evolution as an activist is an important piece of American history that I think isn't told enough in the mainstream and feels particularly important and useful right now to make accessible to people, especially young people. Given where we are today as a nation and a world and all the racial and political polarization that we're seeing, alongside rampant violence, increasing economic disparity, and a democracy, I think, that's completely at risk, legislation that seeks to erase history right now. This launch and books like this are so important. My grandma would always credit her mentor, Malcolm X, with teaching her the importance of knowing your own history and other people's history, because by educating ourselves about history, we can learn where our experiences overlap and intersect, and by connecting with each other as humans, we can broaden our own consciousness and empower ourselves. She learned that from Malcolm. I think it was one of the most important lessons of her life. History, as reflected in her archive, teaches us that radical solidarities between Black and Asian and BIPOC communities and all kinds of people have existed for a long time. I think when I was writing this chapter, I was writing it with the hope that we can continue to learn from history and lift up and support scholars and activists and institutions and organizations and events like this and the people like the scholars here tonight that promote truth-telling and provide us with meaningful ways to connect, support, and learn from each other. And I just want to thank you for being here this evening. And with that, I'm going to read an excerpt from my chapter. And I'll just start. So it was in Harlem that my grandparents first got involved in civil rights. It all started when they became members of the Harlem Parents Committee. and enrolled themselves and their 6 children in the Harlem Freedom Schools and began learning about the history of Black people in America. Their education and involvement in these movements led Yuri, Bill, and their children to participate in and support a wide range of community organizations and to get involved in African American, Asian American, and Third World movements for civil and human rights, ethnic studies, as well as against the war in Vietnam. When I think about the history of solidarities and relationships between Black and Asian people and various communities, there are many stories and examples I could tell. There's one particular relationship, though, between my grandma Yuri and Malcolm X that I'd like to share here tonight. In 1963, Yuri met Malcolm X, a meeting that she would later refer to as her political awakening. Malcolm's friendship and influence dramatically changed her life and her political perspective. She joined his group, the Organization for Afro-American Unity, the OAAU, to work for racial and human rights. Through her lessons at the OAAU's Liberation School and exchanges with Malcolm, Yuri's political perspective became more radicalized and more international in scope. It moved her to become passionately committed to Black nationalist struggles in Africa and in the United States, to support Puerto Rican struggles for independence, to have solidarity with Cuba, and countless other international liberation and sovereignty struggles. On June 1964, Malcolm X visited my grandparents' home in the Manhattanville Projects on West 126th Street. It was upon their invitation to meet with 3 writers from the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Peace Study Mission. These writers were on a world tour. They were speaking against the proliferation of nuclear arms building. They were also hibakusha, atomic bomb survivors. And they wanted to meet Malcolm X more than any other person in America. They asked Yuri to request a meeting. My grandparents' apartment was packed to capacity with an international assembly of activists, artists, journalists, friends, and neighbors when Malcolm arrived, gracious and warm toward everyone who approached him. Yuri said you could hear a pin drop when Malcolm began to speak. He talked about his time in prison, about the history of colonialism in Asia and Africa, about the People's Republic of China, and his admiration for Mao Zedong. He then spoke about Vietnam. As Yuri recalls, the most memorable and important things he said that night were about Vietnam and the implications of American involvement there. He said, "If America sends troops to Vietnam, you progressives should protest. The struggle of Vietnam is the struggle of the whole Third World, the struggle against colonialism, neocolonialism, and imperialism." A few months later, Malcolm embarked on Hajj to Mecca. He sent my grandparents 11 postcards from 9 countries over the course of that journey. My favorite one is the one from Kuwait. It reads, "Still trying to travel and broaden my scope since I've learned what a mess can be made by narrow-minded people." Though she had only known Malcolm for 18 months by the time of his death, his friendship and mentorship had a profound influence on her political perspective. It had transformed her from a liberal civil rights activist to an international revolutionary anti-imperialist. I tell this part of my family's personal and political story as one example of many narratives and histories that exist and that give us an opportunity to reimagine Black and Asian interactions beyond conflict and beyond stereotypes and prejudices that serve to limit our ability to really know each other or to build solidarity and effective movements that protect and serve us. Sharing and documenting our stories and counter narratives is a critical element of building that solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akemi. That was wonderful. As you can tell, we have so much to learn from our personal histories and how they connect to the larger global history. And on that note, I want to pass the mic to Professor Harvey Dong, who's zooming in from Berkeley, California, and his connection to the original strikes that brought about ethnic studies and Black studies and his ongoing work today. Thank you. I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was really surprised about the impact and reach of this book, Power of Our Stories Won't Stop, Intergenerational Truth Telling as Civic Democratic Practice. First, I just want to thank the editors, Helena Moon, for taking up this project, the assistant editor, Madeline Moon Chun, and event organizer and educational partner of the book, Anthony Downer II. Okay. According to Helena, the title of this book was inspired by another book, which Eastwind Books of Berkeley published in 2020. And that was a book edited by myself and Janie Chen, who was an ethnic studies major at UC Berkeley, who had researched the Third World Liberation Front strikes at SF State and UC Berkeley. And that book had a very similar title, Power of the People Won't Stop, Legacy of the TWLF at UC Berkeley. So when Helena mentioned that title inspired the current book title, Power of Our Stories, I was pleasantly surprised, and the other thing is I was just thinking about these slogans, Power of the People Won't Stop, was actually slogans that came out of the 1960s period, right out on the picket line. I just remember as a young student that we couldn't think of any titles, but there were people who were active in the civil rights movement, and they introduced titles to us, so you can see a direct transfer of the civil rights movement in the South and its transformation to Black Power, and then applied to student movement, and then that became like a liberating type force. The strike at UC Berkeley and SF State ended, or the activity ceased, in March 1969. It involved the chancellor of UC Berkeley and the president of SF State actually making a trip to the White House. And shortly after that, there was some type of arrangements made with regards to the first ethnic studies programs in the United States. So so just think about that slogan, Power of the People, the Power of Our Stories. Mass movements have tremendous impact. Don't let them lie to us and say that solidarity means nothing, because in fact, if you look at all these COINTELPRO documents about FBI investigations into social movements, the main thing they're concerned about is solidarity. Are Asians and Blacks, Latinx people, LGBTQ people connecting and bringing together their stories, their struggles, and sharing experiences. So that is a very big concern, which I would say is that the book was a big accomplishment with regards to that, bringing out that message, okay, of solidarity. I myself was involved as a student striker, and shortly after that, I took part in community work in the International Hotel in San Francisco, Chinatown, Manila town. We link the struggle for low-income housing, the struggle to save the Filipino community from big development. We link those struggles with other struggles that were going on in other Black and Indigenous people of color communities, such as Alcatraz occupation and the African American movement, the Black Panther movement. In fact, the Black Panther Party, they actually had a lot of printing equipment and a lot of copying machines that they would loan to us, so that we didn't have internet, and we didn't have mass media type stuff. We had to print stuff, and we had to pass it out. And the Black Panthers had printing operations that they shared with the Asian community. So there's lots of communications back and forth at that time, you know. So one of the projects that we did, I remember, was the opening of a bookstore, Everybody's Bookstore, in the International Hotel, located in Manila Town, right across from San Francisco Chinatown. And that bookstore became a rallying point, I remember, not just for Asian American activists, but I remember young lords from New York would come by and drop off their newspapers for distribution at that bookstore. The bookstore operation closed with the eviction of the tenants of the International Hotel because it was located in that building. And Everybody's Bookstore ceased operations after about 9 years. In 1996, years and years later, myself and my wife, after finding out that another Asian American bookstore, Eastwind Books, was scheduled for closure, we made the decision to purchase that store and rename it Eastwind Books of Berkeley. We didn't want the change to be too big. And it was in operation for 27 years. And we were able to create an important space for generations of writers, poets, and community activists. The bookstore was a venue for book talks, author events, and discussions about community issues as well as solidarity. Okay. After 27 years, we closed the doors actually this year, April 14th, 2023. But at the same time, we felt that it was really important to continue the work and mission of the bookstore through publishing, book publishing, holding community events, and online sales. So today, we are still continuing our work as publishers of Asian American and ethnic studies titles. And there's actually 2 titles that will be coming out shortly. Just want to announce, and they are available at local distributors. One is titled Dauntless, the 1st and 2nd Filipino Infantry Regiments of the United States Army during World War II by author Marie Silva Vallejo. And a second book that's coming out is titled Victory is in the Struggle, From Barrio Boy to Revolutionary and Scholar by Professor Carlos Munoz Jr., an activist in the Chicano movement and also scholar in the Chicano history. Okay, so that's been kind of like my trajectory, you know, of activism, community activism, interest in books about solidarity, and continuing today in my 70s or mid 70s as a publisher. Okay, thank you.
Harvey, thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing that incredibly rich history of the strikes and giving us power for more solidarity and coalition building work. And my family was incredibly lucky that for our spring break, we were heading out to California Yosemite Park, and we stopped off at the Eastwind Books of Berkeley like days before it closed. And they had their pictures taken outside, and we bought a few books. And so it was really, really wonderful that this book project came to a full kind of closure. Unfortunately, Harvey was at another book event that we did not get to meet him, but we met several of your employees, and the store was packed with people. So thank you. Thank you so much for publishing this book. And now I do want to invite E.R. Anderson to come join us once again. And I'm not sure, this is my first time using Crowdcast. I don't know how to access. Magic?
Yes. Yeah, so we want to invite folks to ask questions. And I guess I'll start us off and just ask y'all a general question, which is just, we get at Karis all the time people who are just like, I don't know, both teens and then also parents of teens who are currently in the school system or younger kids who are like, I want to fight these book challenges. I understand they're coming from a very small minority of right-wing parents. We know that the majority, I think it's like 11 people nationwide are challenging almost all of the books. But they don't know how to organize, like a lot of these folks have never been organizers. They don't know how to get together. Do y'all have some places that you recommend, whether it's books or community places that you're like, hey, when I want someone to just kind of get skilled up, this is what I recommend?
I would suggest listing all those banned books and letting people see that list and become curious about those titles, because basically it's about history, it's about struggle against oppression, and people coming together and letting people judge, some type of way to publicize those lists. Like Therese Books posting it at East Wind, we used to put them on our front window, and people would come and say, I want to buy a banned book today.
Yeah, I would second Harvey's comments on just the small things that you can do. You do not have to be, I know this fight has kind of brought out many grassroots and grass tops organizations, but you don't have to be a long-term, full paid activist or consultant or organizer to really understand how to fight back against these book bans. Once again, these book bans and classroom censorship are just one iteration in a long line of the manipulation and control over what we learn and what we think. And so we have to go back to history. And so when we think about how do we organize or respond, we go back to the teachings and the organizations of Ella Baker, or we go back to Dr. Jarvis Givens out of Harvard writes about W.E.B. Du Bois and fugitive pedagogy. And what did they do? They had, as Harvey's kind of mentioning, community backup. They did not depend or leave stranded teachers in the brick and mortar who are at the highest risk for attacks during this time. Who's at the least risk? Our neighbors, our students, our families. They can't fire you all, right? And so one thing to really think about is how you can use this book or other books to just have book reads, right? We're as a family or as a place of worship or as an organization, we're going to read this book for a few weeks or months. You can also, of course, teach some of the courses that are being banned. So find spaces where you can teach Latinx history or Black history. Shout out to Jonathan Campos, who is working on the Beaufort Highway People's Hub, right? They're bringing Hispanic and Latinx history directly to the students and families, writing and literacy workshops directly to the students and families without going through the brick and mortar. And so we need more of those efforts during this time of classroom censorship in which we're protecting ourselves, because they can't exclude it from every single space.
Yeah, I would just say I agree with everyone, and just in terms of what Anthony was talking about, another way, one of the things that he's describing is like freedom schools, right? So, they're forcing us into this, right? If you're going to ban it in school, then we're going to have to educate ourselves and organize ourselves to educate ourselves, which is something that, people did a lot, in the 60s, and how so many people I know in my own family got educated and involved. And so I think that's, this is the time to be building more freedom schools and educating ourselves. And as Anthony said, we can't let the people who are at risk have to do it. We have to do it.
Yeah, I'll just echo. I totally agree. I think that's, we've been studying the attacks on Black studies and all the other kind of right-wing anti-DEI attacks and whatnot this year in my senior seminar. And I'm using another book that I think is also in line with this book. It's called Our History Has Always Been Contraband, and it's about the attack on Black studies, and it's also excellent. So I think like taking this book, taking that book, having these reading groups, and a lot of the point of, you know, what we've talked about is like, why would we trust these institutions anyway? Like I like we don't want them to decide, right? The education system has been so much about disciplining us. So yes to the freedom schools and to, you know, proliferating that in all of our spaces. And yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's why Anthony's follow-up work to this book project of doing podcasts and having conversations outside of institutional spaces is an important project. And I know many students connect through social media, et cetera. So I feel like they'll do more learning in those community spaces and in their homes than they will in the schools. So.
I have a comment and a question for our contributors, and please feel free to our audience members to drop your comments and questions in the chat box. And thank you for your engagement. You know, for me, this book was really difficult to contribute to, and it's all yours fault. No, I'm just kidding. But in reading some of the chapters as they came in, I was blown away and humbled and honored just to be one in the number, right? Included in the number in the parade of scholars, of truth tellers, of educators and community organizers. To know so many of you have impacted history itself. I helped build ethnic studies in Gwinnett County Public Schools. I've taught ethnic and Africana studies. I've taught civics and world history. And so to be in the room, for instance, with Harvey Dong, whose shoulders we stand on. Also, of course, to stand together during a time when we are divided constantly by race and gender and sexuality and class, to have folks of all kind of backgrounds and cultures stand for Black lives and Black studies is really heartwarming. During this time, we are showing and we're trying to model for our communities how you respond to this fight, and part of it is that written word is what we're writing. So one question is, as we think about our core audience, which is really high school and college age youth, who are inside and outside our brick and mortars, trying to find their identities and also trying to be academic. It's what Chris Emdin calls ratchetemic. They're trying to add their identity to that educational piece. How can these students, their educators, schools, and communities really use this book? And of course, connected to this fight, but in general, what could this book be used for in communities?
Well, I think as people suggested, you know, reading groups are really critical. And in my experience, especially in the last couple of years, especially when I'm being asked to speak about Black and Asian solidarity, people seem like really stunned and shocked and feel like they have no access to this story. They've never heard it, they've never seen it. So I think that this book is useful because it touches upon different kinds of solidarities and stories, right? That a lot of people may not know, and they're sort of in different areas, which I think is useful, right? That you can sort of be exposed to different kinds of solidarities in one space. I think it's just the beginning, but it could give some people just the beginning of some context, right? So that they know where to look, right? I mean, a lot of people just don't even know to look these things up because they exist, right? So I think that's one of the things that it's useful for.
There was someone who commented, use it as a model for creating their own collaborative publications. So seeing this as like a starting point for conversation, you know, finding stuff that we are interconnected with each other on, and also differences that need to be, need more dialogue to develop, you know, the conversation. Yeah. So definitely seeing it as a starting point. I know when I did that part of the People Won't Stop on Turbo Liberation Front strike, I was kind of concerned that I didn't get much response in terms of people contributing to it, because the strike had happened so many years ago and all this stuff. But at the same time, something is needed just to place an imprint on history as far as what happened, so that future generations can kind of pick up on it, and I kind of see that as also this book continuing that discussion, and but then it's going to continue onward too, right? As issues develop, who knows what's going to be happening in the next couple of years, war, fascism, or, worse, and it's also part of preparing ourselves, and educating people so that we don't just go along with the program or whatever.
Yeah, to go off of Anonymous as well, I was also thinking, I say Anonymous was the name in the chat that said they can use it as a model for creating their own collaborative publication. I can't believe Anonymous is here. Wow. It's really great to be with everybody though. So yeah, I was also thinking that something that I learned through activism, which is a lot actually, was about popular education, and that's how I learned a lot of things, much more than I learned in my PhD program. And so one of the tactics that I learned, or from popular education, was to put yourself in the timeline, and to tell your own story. So I do feel like even if it's not a conversation with others, I mean, I think you can take this book and realize that like most of the people, we have histories that you can start thinking about your family history. You can start thinking, where do you fit in, and write your own piece, even if it's in a journal to yourself. I love the idea of collaborating, of course. I think we need to get to the place of conversation, but I think doing some of that reflective work to figure out that like everybody really is involved in this, and your history is somewhere in there, could be really useful. And I think we have like models of lots of different ways people are telling their family histories and personal histories here.
We do have a question in our Q&A spot, so I'll share that. What are some of your personal practices to maintain your life force in these especially challenging times?
Well,
that's it. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to say that for me, one of my practices during these challenging past few years has been through writing, through editing the book projects. And I found a great significance in the work that other people are doing. And that helps lift me up and to build community through kind of educational spaces.
I was thinking of Akemi's grandma. She was always doing outreach when she was at the senior home in Oakland. Her room would be filled full of community people talking about prisoners' issues, talking about coming together. And a lot of the people did not know her, but once they did meet her, connections were made, so that this thing about building bridges, getting out of our own comfort zone, and taking things from there. One of the books that I'm working on right now is the autobiography of Carlos Munoz, and there's as a university professor, if he got a request to speak to a fourth grade class about the Chicano movement, he would go to that fourth grade class and speak to elementary school kids. So even being willing to do things like that, is very significant. Yeah. So that we're not just, high up there in the ivory tower, but we're out there in the community, supporting change, encouraging change. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Harvey's saying. I think I was just thinking about, actually been thinking about this a lot. And actually a friend of mine is doing a study on how people are keeping themselves healthy and healing, like especially activists, right? In the time that we are. And I was like having to really think about it myself. So I would say, I think my example also does come from my grandmother, in that she would say that social movements are really social, right? And I think it's really important. I explain to people a lot, my grandparents ran an open house Saturday night party at their home in the Manhattanville projects and public housing for, I don't know, more than 30 years. I caught the tail end of it, in the 70s. But those were social parties, right? So everybody came, people who were doing political work with them, friends, family, neighbors, people who just came to New York and heard there was an open house party, right? And they came and they met all kinds of people, ended up there, and it changed their lives in many kinds of ways. And I think recently I read there's a scholar, Vasundhara Matar, who actually opened about 300 boxes of my grandmother's archives at Columbia University, and then she wrote her dissertation about it, right? And I can't quote from it directly because it's not published yet, but I definitely want to give her credit for this concept of radical hospitality. So she opened 300 boxes, had never heard of my grandmother ever in her life. She's South Asian from Europe, and she's doing her degree at Columbia, and she opens these boxes and she writes her dissertation about this praxis of radical hospitality, right? Of how you build community by making yourself vulnerable, by putting yourself at risk, by putting yourself in community with people in your home, eating food with them, celebrating birthdays, whatever they are. And I think it's really important. I thought that was really amazing to me that she was able to extract that, having never met my grandmother, but just reading all the guest books and stuff like that, understanding that, it's, you build community with people all kinds of ways. And I would say, as many of my grandparents were hosting lunches, parties, fundraisers, political events in their home 7 days a week, 365 days a year, their entire lives, but I'd say half of those things, maybe more than half of those things, weren't political, weren't explicitly political. They were social, right? And that's how they built community. And so I can think of so many people, so many backgrounds from so many different places who became a part of our family and our extended family and friends with other people. And some of them became politicized and involved in many movements, who didn't come to this with any consciousness, who didn't walk in the door with any kind of political consciousness or any historical perspective. And they absorbed it through love and sharing and all of that. So I would say the best thing we can do is to continue to build community with people, is to be in community with people, however you can do that.
That radical self-love, that radical community care is so important in a world that tells us parts of us, or the whole parts of us, don't matter, and in this space where we are so used in the activist spaces, where our energy is used up, our talents, our assets. So all of those, and I don't mean to repeat these, but really being around other radicals, where you don't have to compromise, you don't have to argue, you don't have to expend energy on stupid white supremacist narratives, right? We're not defending all that, right? We're loving on each other and ourselves radically. To be in Black spaces like the Black Teachers Literary Society or Black Man Lab or Georgia Educators for Equity and Justice, where I don't have to experience microaggressions, I can just be in all my glory as a Black man. And that's important. I wanted to read directly from the book really succinctly, because also writing and healing our inner child is important too. To ask people to reflect on what they wish they had known at an earlier time in their lives, especially those folks who are of different ages and hence different periods in the past, is indirectly to expose and critique the dominant and mainstream narratives that we have all been mired in, but perhaps unaware of. So important to tell our stories, to share out what we've been through as far as our experiences and impact of white supremacy. Thank y'all for being here. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and thank you to everyone on this amazing panel and to everyone who contributed to the book. I want to encourage people to buy this book, Power of Our Stories Won't Stop, Intergenerational Truth-Telling as Civic Democratic Practice from Caris. You can do that by clicking this teal button at the bottom center of the screen. one click to order it. It really does help Karis when you buy your books from us. But we also do encourage you to request that your local public library carry it, because we, a lot of this activism is happening in libraries too. So the more we can request the books that we think should be in libraries, the more librarians feel backed up in asserting that community wants certain kinds of books. So heard directly from librarians, it's useful. Please don't be shy in requesting the books that you would like them to carry. There will be a recording of this available. It will be on Karis's YouTube channel, which is /Karis Circle. This will also be available still at this very same URL. So folks will just register and can watch it anytime. I do want to let folks know about 2 events Karis has coming up back to back. Bettina Love, Dr. Bettina Love is a member of many of the communities that are a part of these conversations here in Georgia. And her brand new book, Punish for Dreaming, How School Reform Harms Black Children and How We Heal, is hot off the presses, out now. We are going to be hosting her Atlanta book party at the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history on the 30th. And we would love for folks to come join us for that. It's a Saturday night. Please come through. It's totally free. And then on October 1st, we are hosting a banned book wagon. It is a partnership with Penguin Random House, which is a major publisher, as well as the Freedom to Read Foundation, PEN America, who is one of the main organizations tracking the book bans, and the Little Free Library. We're going to be giving away 500 free books. These are books that have been banned and challenged across America. So Nick Stone, who's a local Atlanta author, will be there. Her book, Dear Martin, has been challenged, as we know, over and over and over again. And she's going to be talking a little bit about what it feels like to have books that are based on your real life get challenged, and particularly how harmful that is to teenage mental health, right? When you finally find a story that reflects your reality as a Black student or a queer student or a student with a disability or whatever mental health stuff going on, and then the school says this book is so dangerous that we have to take it off the shelf, and what that does to a child to feel that, my reality is so dangerous, I have to be removed from the space. So we're really going to be talking about that and how we can support students, whether we have kids in the school system right now or not. We can all be a part of this conversation. So again, that's a free event, lots of free books. We really want to give all 500 of these books out. So come to Karis. It's going to be outdoors, rain or shine, in the back parking lot at Karis. So come on down. And that the first week of October, if folks don't know, is Banned Book Week. So there will be lots of national celebrations, and I think more attention around it than usual, because unfortunately there has been more activity than usual. So it's a great time to make your voice heard in your community. And even, if the way you do it is by purchasing a book or by going to the library and requesting a book, that's a form of activism, and it's really important. So make your voice known. Thank you to all of you. Helena, thank you for being the one to really spark this action with us at Karis. And thank you to everyone who is in this crowd with us tonight. We appreciate your thoughts and your questions. I hope that you all stay safe and well, and that we will get to see you in person sometime soon.
Thank you.